I can pause it.
Yep. All right, recording has resumed. There you go.
Excellent. Okay. But now, come on. Yeah. All right, everyone, I'm going to get started. I'll start with announcements as folks are rolling in. So first off, remember, if you go onto our workflow workshop GitHub organization, posting the just kind of announcements there, and if you've had it set up so that you get an email, you'll see when I post that. All these notes here, most of these notes, like the notes from the previous session, I also have on the website. So if you go on the website and you look at Workshop Weekly Notes, so here's our Markdown one. What you're going to see there is you'll see the video when I get that. Usually it's on a Monday or Tuesday afterwards, and the notes that I used. And then, other material I used during the lecture. And then if you scroll down, you'll see things that I added afterwards in response to questions that came up after the session. And for last week, I also created a little video showing how to create a Word template. I wasn't able to show that on the in the lecture last week because I was working from my PC, and normally I work on my Mac, and it's a little bit different. So I wanted to show you a video so you see that once, exactly how that works. And then we had some questions in the Q&A about how to deal with accessibility in your PDF files. And I'll get more information on this from people who have been doing that to get some more details to share with you. But right now you can look at the tag PDF package, and also I added some notes about that for improving, oops, that's not what I wanted. Improving accessibility for HTML pages. And then I also, let's see if I have it here. Sorry. Oh. Sorry, me and WebEx are fighting a little bit here. Great. Okay. It looks like I didn't put the link here yet for the sort of the notes I had from last year when I talked about that. I'll add that here, but you can also look up here. I'll show you this link in NOAA. I think I put it there. And then I also put links for advanced or Markdown work, sort of like once you've got just the basics down, where to go next. And I put it kind of in order of what, my personal view of what's useful. Okay, so then I wanted to show you this tab here. So I'm going to be adding things to this tab that are specific to us in NOAA. Right now I don't have too much on there. Oh, it looks like I haven't put the 508 accessibility notes there, but I'm going to add that here also. So right now what I have are some links to other NOAA affiliated GitHub sites. And this is really useful for a number of reasons. First, just see what others are doing and how they're structuring things. But also when you are making your, our Markdown files, or you're making kind of, not really, I mean, they're sort of websites, this is like my web page that I'm using, this page here. This was generated with our Markdown. So yeah, it is kind of a web page. But generating those things, and it's really easy to create kind of NOAA branding. So like, getting your colors there, that sort of thing. But you don't want to create that yourself. So going to want to go and look at resources that other groups have already developed. And so this, the Fisheries Integrated Toolbox has repositories where you can go and get that. And I'm going to add some examples of how you can link to this information. And they have this cool palette here to get all the colors and to get sort of the standard oceanography colors that are used in NOAA Fisheries websites. So that's really handy. Also, like things like, what license, what disclaimer should I have there? There's all boilerplate for that kind of stuff. So you just kind of want to go look here and, get that stuff for your GitHub repositories. Okay, great. So as usual, put your questions in the chat. I will be tracking that, and then if you can answer somebody's question, by all means, help them out. Okay, so let's go to the weekly notes. I'm going to post this in the chat so you can click. So today I'm going to give you an introduction to Ggplot2, which is a package very widely used package for plotting. And when you're creating reports, I think it's really important to incorporate Ggplot2 to make yourself a lot more efficient. And the reason is that a lot of times when you're doing a report, the data coming in and the structure of that data may be changing. What do I mean by the structure? So that would be things like, the number of populations or the number of sites or, the number of species or something, that kind of things. And Ggplot2 is really going to make it easy for you to dynamically adjust to that. So none of this, making these sort of bespoke, plots that you would do in BaseR. Andrew asked, was there a class last Friday? Yes, there was a class last Friday, and there is a video of that online. So just go onto the weekly notes and you'll see the video and all the material from last week. The material today is completely independent from last week. So you don't need to have seen last week. Okay, so today my goal is really geared towards people who have never seen Ggplot or people who have tried Ggplot and have been like, this is driving me crazy. I'm spending so much time trying to get the look that I want to, and Ggplot does not behave in any logical way. And if you have been programming and plotting in R for a long time, then you have certainly had that sensation. Okay? So, so this is going to help you out and try to give you an overview of the grammar of Ggplot, how to think about it. And for those of you who've never used it, it's going to give you an intro. And I would say, like, if you're just learning R, you just start plotting with Ggplot, and then you're never going to have the headaches that the rest of us have because we are so familiar with the base R plotting functions. Okay, so that's the goal today. Once you kind of have your head wrapped around it, then I give some links here of next steps. These are two other sort of write-ups that are kind of similar to what I'm doing, which is giving you kind of an overview of the grammar and showing you how to do some basic things. And then I think you can just mostly stop there. I mean, I'm going to show you most of what I actually use on a day-to-day basis in my work. But ggplot's really powerful, and all you have to do is Google intro to ggplot or ggplot2 gallery and just find tons of stuff. But you don't have to go there. I was really intimidated in the beginning because I was like, oh my God, this doesn't make sense. I have to read a book in order to plot in R using ggplot2. That's crazy. But that's not true. You don't need to read a book. Okay. And then I also wanted to note that one topic I'm not going to cover, but is also really important for us when we're working with data and sort of munging that into our reports with our Markdown, is learning tidyverse. This is going to help you out a lot. I gave a lecture on kind of intro to some tidyverse verbs in last year, so you can look at that material. And then I gave sort of in order of my sort of preference of sort of ease of entry, a number of links. So, it gets more stuff here, but if you go through this and then these two here, these three things here, that's going to be, good. That's going to get you really far. Okay. I will note that in my work, I don't use tidyverse a lot. I know how, but I don't use it because a lot of what I'm doing is creating packages and code that needs to run really fast. And a feature of tidyverse is it can be extremely slow, which doesn't matter if you're only doing it a few times, but if you're running a simulation that you're doing 10,000 runs, you care a lot of making things really fast. Okay. Great. And thanks, Jim, for that grammar of graphics there. Okay. So let's go to the lecture notes. If you want to follow along, I put a repository here, or you can just click on this link in RStudio Cloud, and that is going to open up a temporary copy. You can open this right here and just hit knit. You can either hit knit or you can kind of go through the code. If you get to a code thing here, then you can just do that. You see how that just runs right there, and then you can run through all the code as I go through it if that is what you like to do. Okay. Great. I am now going to close this. One thing to know, if you do use RStudio Cloud, I have a habit of just leaving tabs open, and whenever the tab is open, it's running down your clock. And I have run through all my 5 hours for the month in a single day just by accidentally leaving the tab open. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. I don't burn through that. Okay. Let's go here. So I'm going to be working from this R&D file so I can kind of show you. Okay. So let's think about I'll start here. This looks better. Okay. So let's think about your workflow if you were using basic on the plot call in R. So, and I just want to be really explicit about kind of what's going on when you do that. So first, you're going to have to decide what you're going to use as your X. And then you're going to have to decide what you're going to use for your Y. And the base R The plot function would then be plot x comma y. And this is an example code where I'm doing that. So I'm going to decide that my x, I don't have to call it x, I call it anything, but I'm going to call it x. And I'm just using this data file called mtcars that's in base R. And I'm going to use the horsepower element or a part of that data frame as my x. And for my y, I'm going to use miles per gallon in that data frame. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our syntax, that $sign is specifying the, you can think of it like the column in that data frame. So you think of if you're familiar with Excel, you got, a table and you have your different columns. So empty cars is kind of like your Excel table, and then MPG is the MPG column. So it's all the values in that column. So the plot call is then plot x, plot y, val is y, and then I tell it the type to say what I want to plot, which in this case I want to plot points. So if I ran that, pretty simple plot. The ggplot workflow is a little different. And for this really simple case, it does have a few more steps, but later on, this is going to be a lot more powerful than the simple base R plot function. So in the ggplot workflow, you decide on what your x is going to be, you decide on what your y is going to be, and then you make a data frame with the x and the y. A lot of times we already have that data frame, but I'm going to imagine that we don't have that, but we know what our x is and we know what our y is. So now we create a data frame with our x and y, and then we create our plot object using a call to ggplot, and then we add to that whatever lines or points using these other functions. So I'm just going to talk about points and lines this time, and so in this case the line's called gmLine and then the point's called gmPoint. So this is really different. So if you're really familiar with the plot function and you've never played with ggplot, you think of, it's easy to think of ggplot as doing the plotting, and that's not what's going on. Ggplot is just basically setting up that object, and then you can work with that object. So let's see kind of a workflow where I've really broken it out. This is, by the way, not really how I would write it. I'll show you later how I would write it. But let's be really explicit. So we got our data frame here, and so we specify our x, and then I'm going to call my y val, and now we specify the plot object. So ggplot, this is the data, that data frame, and then we use this function called AES, it's aesthetics, to tell it what our x and y are. So that's our x, and that's our y. So now we've set up that object, and now we can do things with that object. So we can say, take that plot object and add on some points. So they're telling you what to do with that. And if we run this code, voila, we get our nice plot that looks like what's coming out of base R. Okay. Has a different default look. We could change that if we wanted. So as I said, like this, all these lines of code here, that's not normally how somebody would write it. You would just write it as one line. So you would say, set up the object, and then you do plus and gmPoint. So this grammar is in ggplot where you're doing the plus. This is kind of this additive workflow. So you create something, and then you add something else onto that, you add something else onto that, and you just keep layering up as you're adding things up. It's really useful to learn this grammar because this grammar is used all throughout the tidyverse and a lot of other plotting functions. It's really versatile to use a kind of an additive workflow. If you're using pipes, that's another example of this kind of additive grammar. Okay, so the nice thing is that, as I said, you can just keep adding things. So if you go back here, I've created these objects, and each of these objects, this is P1, this is a ggplot object, and P2 is also a ggplot object. So let's see, did I do a class line? I didn't. Oh, yeah, I did right here. So class P1, you see it's ggplot. Class P2 is also the same. It's ggplot. And that is really, really helpful when you're doing a complex report, because that means that you can hang on to that object and then later add things to it to create that. Now, that's something that would be impossible with your base R. I mean, or okay, not impossible, probably. I don't know, it might be impossible. It'd be really, really awfully horrible. But with ggplot, it's super easy. So I can hang on to that, and then I can just totally change it. I can, add a different title. I can, just change the whole look of it as I get more. Could be more data, or in a different part of the report, I want to break things out differently. So it's really powerful, that aspect, that each of these things is a ggplot object. So here's an example. So first off, that first P2, that was just the points. And if later I say, okay, but let's put a line through that to see that, and then we could just add that. Or imagine you wanted to show the points, and then you wanted to add a linear regression to that. Well, there's a line where you can add a linear regression to some points. Okay, modifying your plot. So this is an area where, if you're familiar with base R plotting functions, ggplot is going to seem really mysterious in the beginning. So I want to try to break down some of that mystery. So let's first look at base R plotting functions. So how we would change the look of our plot is by adding in these arguments to the plot call. So we've got plot X, plot Y, and then we have this type, which is saying B is both lines and points. Then we can change the line weight, we can change the line type, we can change the point type. So this is a circle with kind of a border there. We can change the color of the border. We can change the background. You just keep adding, things, arguments into this plot call, kind of like this. Okay, so then we get that. So ggplot is quite different. And one thing that is confusing in the beginning is that there are two different kinds of sort of aesthetics. But when I say, I'm going to give it for aesthetic, I'll give a concrete example. So let's just talk about colors. So, so we could do, say, the colors dynamically, and ggplot is going to pick our colors, and we just tell it what we want to have different colors. So like in my plot, if I had a line for males and a line for females, I could tell ggplot to make those lines different colors, and it would show two different lines. But ggplot would pick the colors. The other way is fixed colors. So I manually choose my colors, and I tell it to use specific colors. And that's kind of like what is what is happening with this plot call. So we tell plot, okay, make that background blue, or make that color red. So we manually tell plot to do that. And ggplot, it can do that, but the more common approach is to do it dynamically. But I'm going to show you first how to do it fixed, and then how to do it dynamic. And in my experience, like stuff that I find online, it doesn't really cover the fixed example that much. And often when I am working on a report and I'm in a situation where I need to kind of reproduce a particular graph, a particular look through a plot, because often what I'm doing is I may be making an R Markdown version of an existing report. And it's important that I don't completely change the look of everything. So I want to definitely control the colors. And there are a few different ways that you can do that, and I'm going to show you a way that I've found is has been easiest for me to remember how to do that. Okay, so in ggplot, if you have something that's within the AES, that's the dynamic part. If it's outside of the AES, it's fixed. So it's kind of whatever function you're working in. If it's in an AES, dynamic, so that means ggplot's going to pick the colors for you. And if it's outside that, you're fixing them. So I could put an AES call in this geom point, and it would be dynamic there. But in this case, you can see that I have this, so I've set up my plot here, and now I'm calling the points, and this is not within an AES call, so it's just saying, make all the points blue. And that's what happened. I can give all those kind of things that are sort of familiar to us if you're used to base R, the kinds of things you can specify. And note, remember, all of these are outside of an AES function, so these are all fixed. You kind of set them just like you would with plot. Okay, just sort of pass that in. Okay, so a few things to keep in mind when you're doing this is that these, like passing in these things like this, is working on things like geom point and geom line. Eric, yes, you could use hex colors, definitely. Yeah, just pass that hex color in quotes there instead of using blue. You could also, if you're using palettes, so just set up your palette and then use, whatever number from the color in the palette. That's how usually I'd be doing that in a work situation, is I'm going to set up a palette rather than hard coding in colors, because I need to be able to like change the whole look of things, or like in that example where I talked about the NOAA palette, or NOAA Fisheries palette. I'm going to be using that to standardize the look of all my ggplot. All right. So one thing that is kind of takes a little getting used to is, this example here where you do color blue and nothing happens, and you're banging your head. So here I've said, hey, ggplot, make it color blue, and nothing happens. It's still black. So the fixed part is happening within these individual functions here. But the dynamic part, you could do that within the ggplot call, or you can do it over here also. So now let's see some examples where ggplot is doing it dynamically. Okay. Or this isn't really dynamically. So this is a common error that people would make. If you look on Stack Overflow, you'll see a million questions like this, where somebody has run this call right here, where they've said ggplot, and then they're kind of thinking like base the base plot function in R, and they're like, okay, this is aesthetic, that's kind of setting up the look, so I can just tell it color blue. And then it's like, what on earth, ggplot? That is not blue, that is red. Why did it do that? So within this call, within the AES call, anything that's like in quotes like that, it's a factor. So it's not actually a color, it's the factor blue. And so you can imagine that in this data frame, I had a column that was type of car, and so I had big cars and small cars. So it's a whole column that's saying big car and small car, and those are in characters, big, small. And what this AES is doing is it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to treat that column as a factor, and all the big cars are going to have one color, and all the small cars are going to have another color. That's what's going on there. And when you give it one character value, it helps you out, and it says, oh, you intend that to be your factor name for all the Y values. And so it's just using that same factor name for all your sort of all the values in that column. This is something that I find a little frustrating with R, is that it helps you out that way. So it has helped you out by sort of replicating blue into the whole length of your data, and now making that a factor. It would be, for me personally, I'd find it more useful if it warned me, and then it would clue in that, oh, wait, no, that's not a color, which is right, it's turning it into a factor. So, okay, I'm watching the chat here. If anything's like confusing, you want me to repeat it, I'm going to go through that. I'll talk about that. Okay, so if I pull that color out here, I put in the point, like I said, now it's fixed. It's not in an AES, and it's within something that is talking about a point. Could be a line, also something like that, point line. Something that you would color, could be bars. Then it's going to take the color that I told it. It's going to interpret that as a color. What if we put it back in an AES in the geom point? So now it's dynamic. And then it goes back to this, because now it interprets this not as a color, but as a factor name. And it's going to dynamically pick the colors for you. Okay. So you see this weird thing. Like I said, you go on Stack Overflow and you see people just tearing their hair out because it says this is blue and that is showing it as red. Okay, so now that we kind of know how this is working, now we can see pretty easily how we could tell ggplot to make a plot where we just want a line with a big red points and a thick blue line. So to sort of interpret what I just said, I am basically saying, hey, ggplot, I want you to do a fixed thing. I want a fixed blue and a fixed red dot. So think fixed. So think outside of the AES function. So we've got, so we set up our ggplot call. All we do here is setting our X and our Y. And now we have the line, and we're telling it column blue. And then the point, we're saying the, not column, sorry, color. You can just shorten it that way. Color is red, and then I tell it the size. And now you can see it does that. So really simple if you're in a situation where you do want something that is fixed. Okay, I'm not going to show you the dodge here. Next, I'm going to show you how you do your, how you can change your limits and you can do your labels, because that's another really common thing that we need to do. Okay, so if you were working in base R, what you're going to do is pass in xlim and ylim and xlab and ylab. And then you could do main and you'd make the title. So here's the title, plot, and I set the ylab to value and the xlab to time. And then I set the limits here using that. So in ggplot, it's actually pretty similar to that, but you use functions rather than saying something xlab equals. So it's not an argument, it's a function. So see how it's this plus? So that's that grammar thing, the additive grammar. So I create the object, I add on that I want to do points, and then I add on that I want to do an X label, I add on that I want to do the Y label, then I add on what the title is, I add on what the limits are, and I add on what the Y limits are. So I just keep adding things on, but the names of things are pretty similar. So if I do all that, you can see I then replicate that plot that I got with the base R. All right, so now we're going to kind of go, or not quite yet. I'm going to, I'm going to show you like a couple of things that are also, that's kind of, well, I'm going to show you how adding lines and points, let's put it that way. Okay, so first off, I'm showing you how to change the whole look. So there are these themes. There are all kinds of different themes that you can use. And notice you're just doing the plus. That's that additive grammar. Yeah, this is the classic theme. So this looks a bit more like the base R plot. Just Google ggplot themes and you'll see the different ones. Okay. Next, I'm going to show you how to add lines and points. And so I'm going to show you a workflow that is not the quote-unquote proper ggplot workflow, but I want to show you this because in my experience, I often need to do something like this, and using the right ggplot workflow it requires too much of a change in the sort of upstream workflow. And what do I mean by that? So again, a lot of times what we're doing is we're converting, or what you may be doing is converting code that was in base R or you have, you already have some code and you're making these new plots, and so your prior code might not really be totally set up to use a more proper ggplot workflow. So, okay, so just keep in mind that there's a better way to do this than what I'm about to show you. But this is going to save you, like what I'm showing you this because if you need to do something like this and you start trying to do this in kind of what you're going to see online, if you kind of Google how to use ggplot, you're going to spend like half the day on Stack Overflow figuring out how to add lines without doing it dynamically. Okay, so here we go. So this is the workflow if you were to add lines using base a plot. So you would define what you're going to use for your X1 and X2 for the two different lines you're adding. They may be the same, they may be different, but you have to decide what those are, and then you need to decide what your Ys are. And then how you do it in base R is you're going to plot the first one, and then you run this command lines, and you add it. And a kind of tricky thing is, oh, that's not tricky. So what can be tricky is, if you've ever done a lot of this, it's like you'll run your lines call and you can't see it on the graph. And what's happened is that you didn't specify the X limits wide enough. So, you know, if your X's are really different, then, so if these X limits were, you know, 50 to 300, like you see in these points, so that first call made the points. If my line just happened to be like 500 plus, this wouldn't show up because it's not going to dynamically adjust the X limits, okay? It's just going to add this line to an existing plot. So in ggplot, different workflow. Here's the first one. So same thing, you define what your X's are, you define what your Y's are, and then you do it like this. So you set up your ggplot aesthetic for the first one, then you add your points, and then you can call this line and send it in different data and a different aesthetic. So it looks a little bit like this part here. So that's how you can add it. It's a little bit similar to kind of how you're doing it with plot, where you kind of add on with a different data set. So that's how you're going to change your data there. I think we've shown. Yeah. I think I showed this lower down, but I'll mention it here. You could have this call where you're specifying the data. Pretty sure you can put that up in the G on point, and I will often do that just so I'm really clear to myself what data is being used for each bit. And another reason it can be if you're using this kind of workflow where it's, another reason it's really useful to specify exactly what data is being used for each bit is that ggplot is helpful, and it will flow information sort of down through the elements of this thing that you're building. And so you can get weird things like this happening where, okay, so for this one, the Y is supposed to be called val2. Notice I very explicitly named it a different thing. But it's kind of common that, like, if you were trying to add a line from a different data frame, that you would probably call your columns, your Y columns, the same thing, because you're plotting, you know, there's spawners, and then it's a different data frame, and you'd also call it spawners. Really common. And unfortunately, if you were to do that, ggplot even though you told it, hey, use this one, it uses the old one. So this is another Stack Overflow thing. This is, chock full with people pulling their hair out. They run this code and they don't understand why it didn't use val, why it was using the val from up here. Okay. Let me backtrack a little bit of what's going on there. The example I gave is where you gave the name spawners to both data frames. And that's not when this error occurs. Sorry about that. So in data frame 2, you didn't have spawners. You had spawners 2, but you made a typo and you called this spawners instead of spawners 2. That's the typo that you've made. And if it does that, it doesn't complain, oh, hey, val is not in here. It doesn't tell you that. There is no error that's thrown. It helps you out by saying, well, let me go look. Is val in this original data frame? Yeah, it's there. I'll just use the one up here. So it can create a really weird bug that's really hard to track down. Okay, so very quickly, I'm going to show a better workflow, and then I want to jump in and show you the really big reason why I rely heavily on ggplot, and that is forming plots into grids. So quickly, what's a more proper ggplot workflow if you wanted to add 2 different lines? So what you would do is you would have a data frame where you have your X values, you have your Y values, and then you have a column that is saying, it's the different populations or male, female. In this case, I called them name. One of them is DF1 and one's DF2. And then you tell it, okay, I want you to pick the colors automatically for me based on the name column in my data frame, and I want you to pick the shape based on the name. And you just let ggplot do the work for you. And then you get this plot. So that's the right way to do it, or not the right way. I wouldn't say it's right. I would just say that's that would be kind of a standard ggplot workflow. Is you just have a column in your data frame for the different colors. Yeah, thanks, Abigail. So there's this inherent AES equals false. So there's a lot of tricks with ggplot, and it's very powerful, for customizing the colors. And I'm just sort of scratching the surface there. But to reiterating the thing I said in the beginning, that there are whole books written on using ggplot2. And I was really, intimidated because I was like, I don't want to have to learn a whole. I don't have to read a book to be able to make basic plots. I don't have to do that in BaseR. And what I found is you don't have to do that in ggplot2. If you just learn the really basic things that I've just showed you, and just kind of don't go hog wild on customizing everything, then ggplot's pretty straightforward. Okay, so one thing I want you to note here is the adding legends. So definitely, if you use that workflow I showed you before, of sort of adding lines the way I showed, read that part about adding legends, big headed, and that's kind of why it's best actually not to use that workflow. And I'm only using that when I really have to. If you use the standard ggplot workflow, adding a legend, it just kind of gets on there automatically, and there's really easy ways to eliminate it, put it in different places. So just look at that. Okay, so last 2 minutes, I want to jump into some really basic functions for arranging things into grids. So base R, how we would do this is we would make this call to par, or you could make a call to something called layout. Anyhow, you kind of manually tell it what form you want. So here I'm going to do a 4x4, okay? And I set it up, and the base layout is horrific. It's way too large. So you are going to end up futzing with your margins to try to make it look good. And the problem with that is the moment you need to make this into a 3x6, it's more futzing. So this is the part where you're doing this layout. You spend way too much time working on that. And in ggplot, it's just going to do it for you. And as you change, the number of plots in your layout, just does it. It's so nice. So you're not going to, forget the days of futzing with margins. That's over once you switch to ggplot. So there's kind of two ways that you can set out the layout. One is use a grid extra, and you can manually tell it. So this is a little bit similar to par in that I'm telling it I want 4 panels. This is grid arrange here. Just showing you kind of the simple layouts. There's more complex layouts out there, but grid arrange I found works pretty well for most of my uses. So remember I said that, these objects, they're like these little, nice little plot objects. So I've got my plot 1, plot 2, plot 3, and plot 4, and then I can arrange those into a grid however I want. If I decide, hey, I want this over here, I can just move this over to there. Really flexible, no headaches about margins. You can also do it dynamically, and that is, I should show a few more examples. This is so great. Within your call, you can just add things onto your plot. So here I wanted to add a linear regression line. This would be hours and hours of work in base R. So dynamically, what you do is you're taking advantage of these calls called facet within ggplot. So I'll show you an example here. So here's our ggplot, and I'm just doing my colors, doing the data DF1 and DF2. They're different colors, but they're on the same plot. Using the facet wrap call, I can easily split these out into 2 different plots. And I could have, for that column that's saying the name. So this right here, its name is the name of the column that I'm splitting things on. So if this were, male, female, that would be sex. If this were population name, it would be, pop.name, whatever I happen to call it within my data frame. And then it's going to nicely split that out into these different different panels. I personally mainly use facet wrap, but there's a number of different facet functions. So you should play around, and whichever one is useful for you. And thanks, Jim. Patchwork library. Oh, cool. I haven't played with the patchwork library. Okay, great. And let's see. So you can see, if you just Google about faceting, or I think if you Google ggplot gallery, you'll see lots of examples of how you can use this. The way that I use this is in my reports where I have a template report, a template, a main figure, and then I need, and let's say it's, time series. I need to show time series for all the different stocks within a population. And I have a data frame, and I have all, year, and then I have, spawners, and then I have a column that is, pop name. And I'm doing this for, lots and lots of different ESUs. So for each different ESU, I need kind of the same plot, but the number of populations is going to be changing. So I'm not making specialized little plots for each ESU. I'm just calling a ggplot with a facet wrap on the pop name, and whoop, done. As the data change, no more fussing, with, the size and all the panels and, okay. So, let's see, right, okay. There's more notes. Yes, so I'm not covering everything's in my notes. I would scan through that. These are just tips that I've learned working with ggplot over the years. Plot templates. This is very important. Read this part if you're doing this for our markdown, because you don't want to be copying all these, like you're putting a special theme on things and making it look a particular way, the colors of everything. You don't want to be like copying that code for all of your plots farther down. Just in general, copying big chunks of code into different places is not something you want to be doing as part of your workflow. And ggplot allows you to make your own customized template. You just define that up in the beginning, and then you use that later. So look at that. And then summary. Okay, last 2 minutes. So these are the commands that, for me, are basically 95% of what I use. I'm not doing a lot of bar plots. I'm basically doing points and lines. So your selection of ggplot functions you need kind of depends on kind of the kind of data that you're plotting and the kind of plots you need to plot. But it's not going to be the whole ggplot2 book. You are going to have kind of a small set of functions that you learn, and you can do basically, everything you need with a small set of things. So don't get overwhelmed by the power of ggplot. Just kind of narrow it down to what you need. And look on here for kind of tips if you need to, specialize colors and lines and, set up themes. It shows you how I've done it. If those of you who are on the call use, ggplot a lot, in the discussion on the R workflow, our website, the org discussion on GitHub, throw your examples there too. I'd love to hear from other people what has been really helpful for you with ggplot. And also, if you have tips on how to deal with ggplot and legends, the legend features of ggplot is kind of where I suffer the most, because I'm typically needing to do things that are kind of non-standard. But I give, on the notes, I give tips on if the standard ggplot legends, that thing that's appearing on the side when I say the legend. Where is this? Yeah. This bit right here. It's kind of the standard legends that come out from ggplot. If you need to really alter that for some reason, I give some tips on things that I've done, and maybe they'll help you out. Okay, great. So that is the end of the lecture. And as usual, now I'm just going to do open Q&A. You can ask me about ggplot. Hopefully we'll have some ggplot wizards that are staying on the call, because I am not a ggplot wizard, though I use it all the time. And then feel free to ask any other questions about any of the previous material or, anything. So this is just an open Q&A time. Okay, I'm going to turn off the recorder.